I proposed twice. Same woman. Same answer. And the second time was somehow worse than the first, not because she said no again, but because of what she did right after. That moment told me everything I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Okay, let me back up. My name's Jake. I'm 31. I work in logistics coordination. Basically, I make sure shipments move from point A to point B without everything falling apart. It's not glamorous, but it pays steady and it keeps my head in a structured place. I'm the kind of guy who makes lists before making decisions. I don't do big dramatic gestures for no reason. I don't say things I don't mean. My friends would probably describe me as the reliable one, which sounds boring, but honestly, I've never minded that. I'm not boring. I just don't make unnecessary noise. I met Hannah about 3.5 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday gathering at this small rooftop bar downtown. Not a huge party, maybe 15, 20 people. She was standing near the edge of the roof, looking at the city skyline, holding a drink with both hands like she was warming up on a cold night, even though it wasn't that cold. I remember thinking she looked like she was somewhere else in her head. Our friend Leo introduced us, and within 10 minutes we were deep into this ridiculous debate. She started it, actually. She looked at me completely seriously and said, "Do you think grocery stores are deliberately designed to make people anxious? Or is it just the lighting?" I stared at her for a second and told her both, and that they do it on purpose. She laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one, and said, "Finally, someone who gets it." That was it. We talked the entire night. Hannah worked in event coordination. She helped plan brand experiences, pop-ups, corporate gatherings, stuff like that. She was great at reading rooms, reading people. More emotionally in tune than me, for sure. She noticed things I'd walk right past. She cared about how places looked, how things felt, small details that I never would have considered important. She had this corner of her apartment with just candles and plants and some framed photos, and she'd rearranged it like 4 times since I first saw it, because she was always adjusting the vibe. I teased her about it constantly. One evening I walked in, and she'd moved everything again. I stood there and told her that normal people just leave furniture where it is. She didn't even look up from the candle she was repositioning and said, "You have the aesthetic sensibility of a cardboard box, Jake." I told her that was fair. The first few months were easy. Like genuinely easy. We texted constantly, spent weekends together, found these little routines that just appeared naturally. Saturday morning farmer's market. Thursday takeout with a random movie. Long drives when she needed to decompress from a stressful event week. I didn't manufacture those things. They just happened. And when something feels that natural that early, you start believing it's solid. You start building on it in your head without even realizing you're doing it. By the 2-year mark, we were spending more nights together than apart. She had a drawer at my place. I had a key to hers. We talked about the future in that vague, comfortable way couples do. She'd mention moving somewhere with a real kitchen. I'd say only if there's room for a dog. She'd laugh and say obviously. The kind of language that implies permanence without anyone ever having to say it directly. Her parents knew me. My sister liked her. We had inside jokes that went back so far neither of us remembered the original context anymore. Here's the thing. I didn't decide to propose on impulse. I'm not that guy. I thought about it for close to 8 months before I did anything. I looked at my finances. I thought about where we were realistically. I started setting aside money specifically for a ring without telling anyone. Not because I wanted it to be a surprise in some movie way, but because I wanted to feel ready, not just emotionally, but like, actually prepared. For me, proposing wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was a statement. I don't make that kind of statement unless I mean it completely. When I finally bought the ring, I sat with it in my apartment for almost 3 weeks before I had a plan. I wanted the setting to be meaningful without being performative. Hannah and I had taken a trip early in our relationship to this lake about 2 hours outside the city. Just a long weekend, nothing planned. One of those spontaneous decisions that ended up being one of the better trips I've ever taken. There was this one spot we found on the second day, a wooden dock off the main path that almost nobody used. We sat there for like 2 hours watching the light change on the water. At some point, she said quietly that she didn't think she'd ever been somewhere that peaceful and actually liked it. I told her we'd have to come back then. She smiled and said, "Promise?" I said, "Promise." So I drove us back there. I told her I just wanted a weekend away, kept it simple. On the second afternoon, I walked her back to that dock. It was late fall. Everything was quiet. The water was still. I had a small basket with some things, her favorite snacks, a photo from that first trip. Nothing over the top. I remember my hands weren't even shaking that badly. I was calm, because I was sure. I told her that I'd spent a long time thinking about who I wanted to build my life with, and the answer had been obvious to me for longer than I'd admitted out loud. I told her she made me feel like the best version of a person I was already trying to be. Then I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no either. She got this look on her face, not surprise exactly, more like pressure, like someone had just put weight on a bruise she'd been covering up. She held my hands and said she loved me, that she could see her future with me. She really could. And then she paused. A long pause. And then, but I'm not ready for this right now. I need more time. I stayed kneeling for a second longer than I should have. Then I stood up and said okay. Because what else do you say? I wasn't going to make a scene in the place that meant something to us. I folded everything up quietly inside and told myself it was just the timing. We drove home almost completely in silence, but not an angry silence. More like two people who'd both had the ground shift slightly under them and were waiting to see if it settled. That night she fell asleep first. I lay awake for a long time looking at the ceiling, running the conversation back, trying to find the part that explained the look on her face. I couldn't find it. And I think that was the moment, even if I didn't fully admit it to myself then, that a small, quiet alarm started going off somewhere in the back of my head. I just didn't know yet that I was the only one who could hear it. After that weekend, we never really talked about it. Not properly. Life just kind of resumed. We went back to our routines, our Thursday takeouts, our Saturday mornings. On the surface, nothing had changed. But something had shifted underneath, and we both knew it, and we both pretended we didn't. That went on for a long time. Longer than it should have. I gave it space. Deliberately. I told myself she needed room to process, that pushing would only make things worse. So I waited. A month passed. Then two. Then we hit the holidays. Then winter. Then somehow spring was showing up outside my window, and the topic had never come back up once. Not organically, not in passing, not even as a joke. It had just disappeared. And the strange thing is, I let it. Because some part of me was scared of what a real conversation might uncover. Inside my head, though, it was a different story. I'd replay that moment on the dock constantly. I'd go over her exact words, the pause before she spoke, the way she held my hands like she was steadying herself, not me. I started doing this thing where I try to find alternative explanations. Maybe she'd had a stressful period at work. Maybe the location triggered something emotional and the timing was just genuinely off. I had a whole list of reasons that had nothing to do with me. I kept that list close. But then there were the other moments. The ones that were harder to explain away. Like when her coworker got engaged and she showed me the photos with this completely neutral energy, just said so cute, and kept scrolling, and I sat there thinking, we could be those photos. Or the time my sister asked us casually over dinner if we'd ever thought about moving in together properly, and Hannah laughed and changed the subject so smoothly that I almost missed it. Almost. There was also this one evening. We were sitting on her couch after dinner, nothing special going on, and she was scrolling through her phone and stopped on some post about a couple getting engaged and just stared at it for a few seconds longer than normal. I noticed. I didn't say anything, but I filed it away with everything else. About 8 months after the first proposal, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let the thing just rot in silence. I still believed in us. I still believed in her. And I thought, maybe the setting was too quiet, too isolated, too loaded with memory. Maybe she needed something warmer, something that felt more like a celebration than a question. So I started planning again. This time I went bigger. I spent 3 weeks organizing it. I booked a private terrace at this Italian restaurant she'd mentioned once, just once, in passing, maybe a year earlier, that she'd always wanted to try. I called ahead, talked to the manager, arranged for the table to be set up separately from the main floor. String lights, her favorite flowers, the whole thing. I asked Leo to help me coordinate, and our friend Diane to keep Hannah occupied that afternoon so she wouldn't suspect anything. I bought a new ring. Different style. Something I'd actually paid attention to over the months, noticing what she stopped to look at in windows, what she'd save on her phone. I did my homework. Leo called me the afternoon before and said, "Jake, man, this is either the most romantic thing I've ever helped with or you're about to have a very expensive dinner alone." I laughed and told him I was going with option 1. He said she was going to say yes. I wanted to believe him. The evening went perfectly up until it didn't. We had dinner. The food was great. She was relaxed and happy and laughing at something I said about the breadbasket. Everything felt warm. And then I reached into my jacket and I saw the shift happen in her face before I even said a word. The warmth didn't disappear exactly, but it changed. Like a light that suddenly has too much voltage running through it. I kept going. I told her that I wasn't trying to pressure her. that what I wanted hadn't changed, that I was still completely sure about her and about us. Then I asked her to marry me. She looked at the ring for a moment. Then she looked at me. She started to say something, got about 3 words in, and then stopped, pressed her lips together, and then said, "I just need a little more time. I'm not quite there yet. I'm sorry." The words landed differently this time. The first time felt like a stumble. This time felt like a pattern. I put the ring box on the table between us. Not dramatically. I just set it down. And then I asked her, as calmly as I could, what more time actually looked like. Because we'd been together almost 3 years, and I wasn't asking about a date. I was asking if she actually wanted this. She said she did want it. She just didn't know if she was ready. I asked what the difference was. She didn't answer that. She talked about not wanting to rush, about needing to feel 100% certain, about how big a thing marriage was. I told her I knew how big it was. That's exactly why I was asking her and not someone else. She reached across the table, touched my hand, and asked if we could just go home and talk about it properly. I said okay. Again, we talked at home, or we tried to. It went in circles for a long time. She kept saying she loved me, kept saying she saw a future with me, but every time I tried to get to something specific, a real reason, a real fear, an actual obstacle, she'd go vague. And I sat there watching her be genuinely upset and couldn't tell if she was struggling because she cared so much or because she was trying to say something she didn't know how to say. Eventually, I asked her the thing that had been sitting in my chest for months, whether it was marriage in general she wasn't ready for, or marriage specifically to me. The room got very quiet. Her eyes filled up and she told me that wasn't fair. I said I knew, but I needed her to answer it anyway. She said of course it wasn't me. Why would I even ask that? But she said it like a deflection, not like an answer. And I heard the difference. I went quiet after that. Not angry quiet, just empty quiet. Because in that moment something clicked into place that I hadn't wanted to look at directly. If the answer was clearly yes, she would have said yes. Twice. And she hadn't. And now we were sitting across from each other, and she was crying, and I was completely still, and I realized that the most honest thing in the room was the silence. The next few days were like living inside a low-grade headache. We were polite to each other. We coexisted. She tried a couple of times to bring it back up, but kept retreating before anything real got said. And then one evening, I was at the kitchen table going through work stuff, and she sat down across from me and told me she didn't want to lose me, that she needed me to know that. Something about the way she said it hit me like cold water. Because she hadn't said she wanted to marry me. She'd said she didn't want to lose me. And those are not the same thing. I looked at her and told her I didn't think that was enough for me anymore. She asked what that meant. I told her I'd asked twice, I'd waited, I'd given her space. And the only time she seemed close to saying yes was when she was scared I was about to leave. And I said I couldn't build a life on that. Her voice cracked. She asked if that was it, if I was just done. I told her I didn't want to be. But I couldn't keep waiting for her to decide if I was worth deciding on. I stayed at Leo's place that week. Packed a bag, took what I needed, told him I just needed some time to think. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just handed me a set of keys and said, "Guest room's yours for as long as you need." That was enough. I sat in that guest room on the first night and thought about the dock, the way the water looked, the way she'd said promise and I'd said promise. I kept that promise. I came back. I asked again. I gave her every chance I had. The part one hadn't planned for was that she might not be ready to keep hers. 3 days into staying at Leo's, I woke up at 6 in the morning and just stared at the ceiling for about 40 minutes without moving. Not thinking about anything specific. Just existing in that strange flat state where your brain hasn't caught up to the situation yet. That passed pretty quickly. Then everything caught up at once. The relationship was over. Not officially, not with a clean ending yet, but I knew. I think I'd known since that kitchen table conversation. Maybe longer. The official part was just paperwork at that point. Hannah started texting the second day. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just persistent. Short messages at first, asking if we could talk. Then longer ones, late at night, the kind you write when you've been sitting with your phone for 2 hours working up to it. She said I was throwing away everything we'd built over something she just needed more time with. She said marriage wasn't a deadline. She said I was treating her feelings like they didn't matter. I read all of them. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was playing games, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say that wouldn't just restart the same loop we'd been stuck in for months. After a few days I wrote back and told her I heard her, that I wasn't angry, and that I just needed some space. She called immediately after that. I let it go to voicemail. I'm not proud of that, but I also wasn't ready to have a conversation I didn't have the words for yet. Then came the outside noise. Her friend Rachel texted me. We'd met maybe 6 or 7 times total, and said she thought I was being cruel, that I'd given Hannah an ultimatum instead of a real conversation. Then Leo's coworker Danny, someone Hannah and I had both hung out with a handful of times, sent me a message saying he wasn't taking sides, but thought maybe I hadn't given her enough room. 2 years of room, I thought. 2 proposals. 2 rings. I didn't write that back to him. I just said I appreciated him reaching out. My sister called me around that same time. She'd heard through the grapevine that we'd split and asked what happened. I gave her the basic outline. She went quiet for a moment and then said, "I'm sorry. I really liked her." I told her, "Yeah, me too." That was a harder conversation than any of the accusatory ones. Because it wasn't about blame. It was just loss. And loss without someone to be angry at is a lot harder to carry. The messages from Rachel and Danny planted a seed of doubt that I spent about a week watering without meaning to. I started running the whole thing back again, looking for the moment I'd been unreasonable. Maybe I'd been too rigid. Maybe I'd put so much weight on the proposal as a symbol that I'd missed what she was actually trying to tell me. I sat with that guilt for a while. And then one night, I was lying on Leo's couch watching something I wasn't actually watching, and it hit me clearly and simply. The issue was never the timing of the proposal. The issue was that after nearly 3 years together, she still hadn't arrived at a place of certainty about us. And that's not something you fix by waiting another 6 months. That's something much more fundamental. About 2 weeks after I'd moved out, she sent one last message. It was different from the others. Shorter, calmer. She said she thought she understood why I left, that she didn't fully agree with how it happened, but that she thought she understood it, and that she hoped I was okay. I read it 3 times. Didn't respond for 2 days. Then I wrote back, "I hope you're okay too." And that was the last thing either of us said to each other. When I read her final message, I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Not happiness. Not relief exactly. More like finality. The kind that doesn't feel good, but feels real. I moved into a new place about a month later. Small apartment, quieter neighborhood, closer to work. I repainted one wall in the living room a dark green because I'd always wanted to do that and Hannah had always voted it down. Small thing, but it felt like mine. I got back into cooking properly, which I'd let slide over the past year. Started taking long walks in the evening instead of sitting with my phone. Hannah used to joke that I'd love woodworking because I liked things that had clear steps and a visible result. She wasn't wrong, and I finally signed up for a class on weekends. The structure helped. Having things to do with my hands helped. Leo came over for dinner one night about 6 weeks in, looked around the apartment, and said, "This place actually feels like you." I asked if that was a good thing. He laughed and said, "Yeah, man, it really is." It took me a second to realize he was right. About 3 months after the breakup, I ran into Hannah. Not planned, not dramatic. I was picking up something from a hardware store on a Saturday afternoon, and she walked in with someone. A guy I didn't recognize. They were laughing at something when they came through the door, that easy, comfortable laugh of 2 people who are relaxed around each other. She saw me about 2 seconds after I saw her. We both made a decision in under a second about how to handle it. She gave me a small wave. I nodded. That was it. I turned back to what I was looking at, and they went in a different direction. I stood there for a moment looking at a row of paint samples and thought, okay, that's what after looks like. It stung. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. Not because I wanted her back. I didn't. Not in any real way. It stung because it made the ending real in a way that even moving out hadn't quite managed to do. It was the visual confirmation that the chapter was closed. Both of us had turned the page. I thought about that evening on her couch, back when we were still together. The way she'd stopped scrolling and just stared at that engagement post for a few seconds too long. Maybe she just needed to get there on her own timeline. With someone she felt more certain about. That wasn't a cruel thought. It was just an honest one. I drove home and sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes before going inside. Not falling apart, just processing. There's a difference. I think about those 3 years sometimes. Not obsessively, not with bitterness. More the way you think about a place you used to live. You remember it clearly. You might even miss certain parts of it, but you don't want to move back. What I've landed on, after all of it, is this. I don't think Hannah was a bad person. I don't think she was stringing me along on purpose. I think she genuinely cared about me and also genuinely wasn't sure, and those 2 things existed in her at the same time, without either one canceling the other out. What I couldn't do was keep living in that in-between space on her behalf. Some people need more time to get to certainty. I understand that. But at some point the person waiting has to decide how long is long enough. That's not cruelty. That's just honesty. I'm in a different place now. Not perfect, not completely untouched by what happened, but okay in a way that feels real rather than performed. I still think about what I'd have done differently. Probably had the hard conversation earlier. Not the proposal, the actual conversation about where we both stood. Maybe that would have changed something. Maybe it wouldn't have. Honestly, I'm not sure it matters anymore. Sometimes two people want real things, and those real things just don't line up. That's not a villain story. It's just life. Anyway, I don't really know what I'm looking for by putting this out there. Maybe just to hear how it reads from the outside. So, was there a point where you would have walked away sooner? Or do you think I should have kept waiting?
Jake, it's clear from your story that you gave this everything you had, but at some point, you just have to accept that she wasn't your person. When you have to convince someone to choose you, it's usually a sign that something much more real and sincere is waiting for you further down the road. Just keep leaning into this new version of your life, the woodworking, the green wall, because when the right person comes along, you won't have to wait for them to be sure.